Hello? Oh, hey, honey. Mom, I am so sorry, but we're gonna have to change our plans. What? Change? What do you mean? I told you not to worry about it, Mom. Just make yourself a quick bite to eat. Please. I am so sorry. I just didn't know how to tell him. In another year, we'll still have everything handled just right. I set out 12 place settings, just like we planned. George, I knew you'd come. That phone call came 3 days before Christmas from my son, Nathan Bington. He was calling to let me know that our 32-year family tradition was officially over. This year, everyone was heading over to his mother-in-law, Patricia Dawson's new mansion instead. In his exact words, it was time for us to try something a little more modern. George. He made a point to tell me on the phone that I didn't need to do a thing this year. Not even cook a single dish. I just smiled, wished him a Merry Christmas, and calmly hung up. Then I walked straight into the dining room, laid out my late husband's favorite tablecloth, and carefully arranged 12 place settings. George. At the time, I had no idea that before Christmas Day was even over, most of my family would end up right back around my table. The morning after Nathan called, I woke up before sunrise. I'd spent every single December like this for over 30 years, and old habits don't just disappear simply because someone tells you they aren't needed anymore. George. My little aged red brick house sat wrapped in a light dusting of fresh snow on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio. Hanging proudly on the front door was the exact same Christmas wreath Richard and I bought during our very first year here. The red velvet ribbon had faded over the years, but I never once thought about replacing it. George. Richard used to say that things bringing back memories of love never needed to be perfect. I stood by the kitchen window with a steaming cup of black coffee, warming my hands against the mug as I watched our classic Midwestern neighborhood wake up. Across the street, Mrs. George. Jenkins was already out on her porch hanging holiday lights, and the Henderson boys were out on the lawn, building another wobbly snowman. Everything on this street stayed the same. The only thing changing was my family. I retired from teaching elementary school about 7 years ago. For nearly 40 years, I poured my life into teaching kids how to read, solve problems, and believe in themselves. George. People often asked if I missed teaching. Sometimes I did, but mostly I just missed that feeling of being needed. 15 Christmases ago, Richard passed away suddenly from a heart attack. From that day on, the holidays became my whole world. Every Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, our house turned into the gathering place for everyone. George. It wasn't because our place was the biggest, because it definitely wasn't. And it wasn't because I served fancy, high-end food, since I never made anything like that. People came because they felt comfortable here. George. They could kick off their shoes without asking. The grandkids could play board games right on the living room rug, and the adults would get into heated debates over NFL scores, while sneaking slices of my homemade pecan pie before dinner even started. Someone was always laughing a little too loud, and someone would always shed a tear, remembering Richard. George. When the night finally wound down, nobody ever wanted to leave. Richard loved Christmas more than anyone I ever knew. Every year, before the sun even came up, he'd turn on that classic Frank Sinatra Christmas album. He insisted on carving the turkey himself, always putting on a silly show like he was some celebrity chef. George. Every single year, he'd get so caught up telling stories to the kids that he'd end up burning the first batch of dinner rolls. Everyone would tease him about it, and every year, he'd be the one laughing the hardest. After he passed, I kept every single tradition alive, exactly the way we built them together. George. Not because I couldn't move past my grief, but because tradition is how a family remembers who they are. Nathan used to understand that. When he was little, he'd sneak downstairs at 5 in the morning just to help his dad set out presents under the tree. He'd stand next to Richard in oversized pajamas, asking 1,000 questions before breakfast. George. Even as a grown man, he insisted no one made mashed potatoes like mine, and that Christmas didn't truly start until he smelled cinnamon rolls baking in my oven. Those sweet memories made his phone call hurt even more, reminding me that my son hadn't always been so distant. The real shift started 12 years ago when he married Olivia. I truly liked Olivia from the start. She was polite, hardworking, smart, and most importantly, she made Nathan happy. I welcomed her into our family with open arms. When my granddaughter Abby was born, I even thanked God for giving me such a wonderful daughter-in-law. The problem was never Olivia. The problem was her mother. Patricia Dawson had a distinct way of walking into any room, as if she were hosting an invisible competition. She rarely raised her voice and almost never said anything outright rude. Instead, she mastered the art of wrapping criticism inside a compliment. During Nathan and Olivia's first Thanksgiving with us, Patricia tasted my turkey stuffing and offered a sweet little smile. "Oh, Winifred, it's so charmingly old-fashioned how you still make everything from scratch." These days, most people just order pre-made spreads from high-end markets to save themselves the hassle. Everyone at the table laughed politely, and I laughed right along with them. But somehow, she managed to write off decades of family tradition as nothing more than outdated extra work. The following Easter, without asking anyone, she showed up with expensive custom desserts from a fine restaurant. Then, on the 4th of July a year later, she suggested renting out a venue at a country club, claiming my backyard felt a bit too crowded. Little by little, she pushed her way into traditions that weren't hers to take over. I kept telling myself there was no need to cause conflict. Keeping a family together takes compromise, or at least, that's what I believed. Richard used to tell me that choosing peace was a sign of strength. But sometimes I couldn't help but wonder if I'd misunderstood him. Maybe peace didn't always mean staying quiet. Maybe sometimes it meant quietly holding your ground. A gentle knock at the door broke my train of thought. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, holding a small basket with a fresh loaf of home-baked cranberry bread. "I made extra again," she said with a grin. "I figure you're busy getting ready for the famous Binkton family Christmas feast?" For a second, I forgot how to answer. I managed to force a smile. "Oh, not this year," she tilted her head. "Not this year? The kids want to try something different." The smile slowly faded from her face. "I'm so sorry to hear that." I shrugged as naturally as I could. "They're all grown up now." Mrs. Jenkins reached over and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. She said softly, "A house doesn't make Christmas, Winnie. People do." After she left, I stood in the hallway for a long time, turning those words over in my mind. A house doesn't make Christmas. People do. Love does. Memories do. I went upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were dozens of carefully wrapped holiday decorations. Richard's favorite wooden nativity set, a crude ornament Nathan painted back in kindergarten, a paper snowflake Abby cut out when she was 6. Every single item held a story. I carried them downstairs one by one. Once everything was set up, the tree looked beautiful, just the way Richard would have loved it. Then I opened my recipe binder. The pages had yellowed over the years, many written in Richard's handwriting, while others were stained with old traces of butter, cinnamon, or cranberry sauce from Christmases long ago. I slowly wrote out my grocery list. Turkey, fresh green beans, sweet potatoes, heavy cream, pecans, flour, butter, fresh rosemary, cinnamon, everything I'd bought every December for over 30 years. Halfway through, my pen stopped. Nathan told me not to cook. Nobody was coming. At least, that's what he thought. I closed my eyes and pictured Christmas Day, an empty house, a silent dining room, and a single plate on the table instead of 12. The sting of that image was worse than I expected. Then another memory surfaced. Richard laughing right here in this kitchen after burning yet another pan of dinner rolls. He looked at me and said, "Winnie, we don't cook because people deserve perfect food. We cook because love should always have a seat at the table." I smiled through my tears. "You were always right," I whispered. I grabbed my purse, picked up the grocery list, and headed straight to the local Kroger. Maybe I'd end up eating leftovers for a whole week. Or maybe no one would walk through my front door at all. Porch. But as long as I could stand in my own kitchen, I was not going to let 32 years of love fade away, just because someone thought another house looked newer. If Christmas arrived at my home with only a single guest at the table, I was going to make sure that one guest felt completely loved. By Wednesday afternoon, the snow had stopped. Porch. Columbus was wrapped in a quiet white blanket, and everything outside looked so peaceful. I only wished my heart felt the same way. I'd just polished the silver serving tray Richard's parents gave us for our wedding when the phone rang. It was Nathan. For one silly second, hope surged inside me. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he realized how much spending Christmas at our house meant. Porch. I picked up, an automatic smile forming on my face. Hi, honey. Hey, Mom. His tone was casual, maybe a little too cheerful. Just wanted to make sure you got all the details for Friday. I got them. A brief silence followed. Great. He paused again before adding, I know it's different from usual, but I really think this is for the best. I set the silver tray down gently. Best for who? Porch. He gave an awkward chuckle. Mom, come on. Nathan, I'm just asking a question. Patricia just has so much more space over there. Our house has always been big enough. She has 2 dining rooms. We've never needed 2 dining rooms. The parking is much easier over there. Just to save people a 30-foot walk? He sighed deeply. I knew you were going to take this personally. Porch. That hit harder than I expected because I wasn't taking it personally. It was personal. I'm not complaining, I replied calmly. I just asked a question. It's just, we wanted to try something new. He hesitated. Olivia and I closed my eyes. Richard taught me years ago that hesitation often reveals far more truth than a confident statement. So, this was Olivia's idea? Porch. No. Another pause. Not entirely. Then whose was it? Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, I heard him take a heavy breath over the line. You know Patricia has been wanting to host for a long time. There it was. This wasn't a family decision or a practical choice. It was about validating someone's pride. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What about everyone else? Porch. Were they fine with this? Did you ask everyone? Mom. Nathan. He went quiet. I told everyone we were doing Christmas at Patricia's. You told them. Yes, you didn't ask. I could hear him rubbing his forehead so hard I could almost see it through the phone. I didn't think I needed to. I looked toward the family room where a whole wall was covered in framed Christmas photos. Porch. Nathan riding on Richard's shoulders to hang lights. Nathan holding his very first bike by the tree. Nathan showing little Abby how to decorate cookies. Every single picture reminded me that the son I knew wasn't the man talking to me on the phone. I see, I finally said. I respect the decision. But Nathan, yeah? I hope everyone has a wonderful time. He sounded relieved. They will. Porch, I mean it. I know you do, he cleared his throat. And Mom, yes? Please, don't worry about cooking. I glanced at the open recipe binder on the counter. I already bought the groceries. You can just freeze most of it. I suppose so. I just don't want you working hard for nothing. Nothing. Such a tiny word, yet so hurtful. After ending the call, I sat alone in total silence. Porch. For the first time since Richard passed, I began to wonder if traditions really could disappear simply because one generation stopped protecting them. A knock at the door broke the silence. Before I could reach the entryway, the door cracked open. Grandma? It was Abby's voice. A smile rushed to my face. Come on in. Porch. My 16-year-old granddaughter walked in wearing a navy blue winter coat, carrying her backpack. She wrapped her arms around me, holding on much longer than usual. When she finally pulled back, I noticed her eyes were red. What's wrong? She shook her head. Nothing, I raised an eyebrow. I taught 3rd grade for 38 years. She let out a tearful laugh. I forgot. Porch. You can't fool a retired teacher. She followed me into the kitchen. I only have 20 minutes, she said. Mom thinks I'm studying with Hannah. I poured 2 cups of hot chocolate. She cupped hers with both hands without taking a sip. Finally, in a quiet voice, she said, I hate this. I didn't play dumb. Because of Christmas? She nodded. It feels completely wrong. Porch. I reached across the table and took her hand. Families change, sweetheart. This isn't changing. This is replacing. That word caught me off guard. It sounded far too mature for a 16-year-old girl. What do you mean by that? She looked toward the dining room. Grandpa built all these traditions. You helped keep them alive. Dad grew up right here. You know every ornament on that tree. Porch. You still bake cinnamon rolls the exact same way. She swallowed hard. Now Grandma Patricia is acting like none of it matters. I stayed silent as Abby kept going. She keeps saying it's time for a modern Christmas. I let out a bitter smile. So I heard. She changed everything. Porch. No stockings, no homemade cookies, no decorating together, and no holiday music until the guests arrive, all because she wants it to look elegant. I couldn't help a soft chuckle. Holiday music never ruined elegance. Abby smiled, but then her face turned serious again. Grandma, yes? Dad lied. I frowned. What do you mean? He told you everyone agreed to go over there, right? Porch. She shook her head immediately. No, my heart sank. Uncle David wanted to come here. Aunt Susan did too. Uncle Thomas said Christmas belongs where family feels welcome. They got into a huge argument. I stared at her. There was an argument? She nodded. Last Sunday. I heard the whole thing. What happened? Dad announced Christmas was moving. No vote, no discussion. Porch. Grandma Patricia just smiled like it was already set in stone. Then everyone looked so uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to start a fight, so everyone just stayed quiet. Silence. Sometimes silence sounds just like agreement, even when it isn't. I knew things weren't right, Abby whispered. I wanted to tell you sooner. You don't have to pick sides, sweetheart. Porch. I'm not picking sides. She looked me straight in the eye. I'm picking Christmas. The innocence in that answer almost broke me. I reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You sound just like your grandfather, I said with a smile. I wish I remembered him even better. If he were here, he would adore the young woman you're growing into. She wiped away another tear. Porch. I don't want to see you sitting here all alone. I won't be alone. I have my memories. I don't want memories. I want you. Neither of us said a word for several seconds. Then I stood up and opened one of the kitchen cabinets, pulling out a large tin container. Do you know what's in here? She smiled. Grandpa's gingerbread cookie cutters. That's right. I handed the tin to her. Take it. Porch. What? We started making cookies together when you were 5. You should keep the tradition going. She pushed the tin back to me. No. Why not? Because we're supposed to make them here. I gave her a gentle smile. Abby, no matter what your dad says, I'll come see you after Christmas if I have to. We'll make them together. You promised we'd always do it together. My throat tightened. Porch. I remember. She stood up, hugged me tight again, and whispered so softly I could barely hear. I'll fix this. I pulled back slightly to look at her face. No, she blinked. What? It is not your job to fix the mistakes adults make. But listen to me. I placed both hands on her shoulders. Do you love your parents? Yes. Do you love me? Yes. Porch. Then don't let anyone force you to stop loving either side. She gave a slow nod. I don't want this family falling apart over Christmas. She looked lost. But what if nobody speaks up? I offered her a smile filled with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Sometimes, love has its own way of speaking up. She kissed my cheek and left through the front door. Porch. I watched her walk down the snow-covered sidewalk until she disappeared around the corner. Then I turned back toward my dining room. 12 chairs, 12 empty seats. For the first time since Nathan's call, I realized something important. Not everyone actually chose Patricia's Christmas. Some people were just going along out of politeness, lacking the heart to say they didn't want to go. Porch. Thursday morning brought bright sunshine. The light reflected off the fresh snow, making the whole neighborhood sparkle as if no pain had ever touched it. Christmas has a kind of magic like that. Even when your heart is at rock bottom, it still makes the world look beautiful. I wrapped my scarf around my neck and headed to my favorite grocery store just past 8 o'clock. Porch. Years ago, Richard and I learned that the earlier you shop before Christmas, the friendlier everyone seems. By noon, the aisles would be packed with rushed shoppers looking for forgotten ingredients and last-minute gifts. Some traditions never change. As I pushed my cart through the produce section, I found myself reaching for the exact things I always bought. Fresh green beans, sweet potatoes, celery, cranberries. By the time I reached the meat department, my cart looked identical to every December over the past 30 years. I stared at the large turkey sitting in the display case. The young butcher smiled. Looks like someone's hosting Christmas dinner. Before I could stop myself, I smiled back. I've been hosting for a very long time. He wrapped the turkey carefully. My grandma always used to say that the person who makes Christmas dinner is the one keeping the whole family together. I thanked him, but his words lingered in my mind for a long time, keeping the whole family together. I didn't know if that was truly my job anymore. Maybe all I ever did was open my door every year and let love walk in. While waiting in the checkout line, I spotted another familiar face. "Winifred!" Mrs. Alvarez called out, hurrying over from the floral section, holding a few pots of poinsettias. "I was hoping I'd run into you before Christmas." She gave me a warm hug. "You must be getting ready for your famous dinner." The question caught me off guard once again. News travels fast in a neighborhood like ours. For years, almost everyone on this street knew that Christmas meant dozens of cars parked along both sides of my driveway, kids running between the front and back yards, and laughter pouring out through the open door. "It's going to be a quiet Christmas this year," I answered gently, her eyebrows pulled together. "Really? The younger generation wants to try something different." Mrs. Alvarez didn't push any further. She just looked down at my overflowing cart. "Well, you don't look like someone preparing for a quiet Christmas." I let out a soft laugh. "I guess old habits die hard." She touched my hand gently. "I hope the people sitting around your table know just how lucky they are." I thanked her, but those words stayed with me all the way home. The people sitting around your table. The truth was, I didn't know if anyone would be sitting there at all. Back home, I carefully unpacked every grocery bag. The kitchen instantly filled with familiar scents. Fresh rosemary, oranges, brown sugar, cinnamon. In that moment, I could almost pretend nothing had changed. I turned on Richard's favorite Christmas playlist. Frank Sinatra's voice drifted through the kitchen, just like it always did. I hummed along without realizing it as I measured flour into my largest mixing bowl. The recipe was so familiar, my hands didn't even need my brain to give directions. 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt. Richard used to tease me because I never looked at a recipe when I baked. "You've memorized Christmas," he'd say with a laugh. Maybe I really had. As the cinnamon rolls baked, a sweet aroma filled every room in the house. It hovered around the old furniture, drifted up the stairs, and floated into the living room where our softly glowing Christmas tree stood. That exact scent had welcomed Nathan home every Christmas morning since he was 6 years old. Even as an adult, he'd walk through the front door, take a deep, exaggerated breath, and grin. Now it finally feels like Christmas. That memory made me pause mid-need. Would he miss that smell today? Or had Patricia already found a high-end bakery that made prettier cinnamon rolls? I immediately felt guilty for even thinking that. This wasn't a competition. Richard would never have wanted to see comparisons like that. Later in the afternoon, I carried a few boxes down from the attic. Each one was packed with decades of holiday decorations, and I unwrapped them item by item. A wooden angel Nathan carved in 7th grade, a tiny clay ornament Abby molded in elementary school, and a paper chain we could never bring ourselves to throw away because Richard insisted every imperfect link represented a beautiful memory. None of them matched, and none of them looked expensive. But together, they told the story of our family. I carefully hung each decoration back in its usual spot. By evening, the tree looked wonderfully imperfect, which was exactly how Christmas was supposed to feel. As I took a few steps back to admire it, the doorbell rang. Standing on the porch was Kevin, our mail carrier, holding a stack of letters and a small package. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Orchbington." "Merry Christmas, Kevin. I take it this is the last delivery before the holiday?" I thanked him and brought the mail inside. Most were Christmas cards from church friends, former colleagues, and neighbors. One envelope caught my attention, written in the handwriting of Richard's cousin, Uncle Thomas Reynolds. He rarely sent cards. Orch. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Looking forward to seeing everyone this Christmas. Some traditions are worth keeping." I smiled. He clearly hadn't heard about the venue change yet. I reached for my phone, thinking I should call and explain everything before Christmas morning. My finger hovered over his name, then I stopped. No, I wasn't going to recruit allies. Orch. If people wanted to spend Christmas somewhere else, that was their choice. I folded the note and placed it on the mantel next to Richard's picture. As night fell, a golden glow reflected across the snow-covered yard. The house felt peaceful, not empty, just waiting. I brought out 12 porcelain plates from the cabinet. Orch. It was a set Richard bought almost 30 years ago after receiving a Christmas bonus. "We're going to use these every holiday," he said proudly back then. "One day, our grandkids are going to argue over who gets to inherit them." I smiled at the memory. 1 plate, 2, 3. I placed each one carefully around the dining table. Orch. Then came 12 folded napkins, 12 wine glasses, 12 polished forks, and 12 candles. When I was finished, I stood at the head of the table. Everything looked exactly as it always did, except for the empty chairs. For a brief second, doubt crept into my mind. Was I being foolish? Was I refusing to accept reality? Maybe Nathan was right. Maybe families naturally move on. Orch. Maybe traditions belong to a single generation before slowly fading into memories. I almost started packing everything away, but then I caught sight of the empty chair at the end. Richard's chair. I walked over and rested my hand on the wooden backrest. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," I whispered softly, "but I know what you would have done." Orch. Richard never measured love by convenience, and he never believed people could be too busy for family. No matter what, he would have made the meal. He would have welcomed anyone who walked through that door, even if only one person showed up. I smiled through my tears. "All right then. I'll do it your way." Orch. I turned off the dining room overhead light, leaving only the Christmas tree to cast its warm glow across the table. The 12-place settings reflected the soft light, looking less like empty seats, and more like a silent promise waiting to be kept. Christmas Eve arrived, with a pale gray sky, signaling more snow before morning. For the first time in over 30 years, my house was completely quiet. Orch. Usually by Christmas Eve, someone would have already dropped off a pie, kids would be running through the front yard, and Nathan would swing by before dinner to sneak a cinnamon roll while pretending Olivia didn't see. Right now, the loudest sound in the house was the rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock Richard left behind. Orch. I stood in the kitchen wearing the red apron Richard gave me for our 25th anniversary, the same one I wore every Christmas. Embroidered on the front in gold thread were the words, "The soul of Christmas lives here." Richard laughed when he gave it to me, saying, "You'll probably be wearing this until we're both old and gray." He was half right. I grew old, but he never got the chance to. Orch. I tied the apron behind my back and reached for the turkey that had been resting in the fridge overnight. Its weight felt grounding in my hands. Some people might call me stubborn, and maybe I was. But preparing Christmas dinner wasn't just about feeding people. It was how I remembered my husband and how I showed love to my family, even if they weren't there to receive it. Orch. By 8 o'clock, butter was melting in the skillet, and the familiar scent of fresh herbs filled the kitchen. The coffee maker was brewing a fresh pot, and the cinnamon rolls were just finishing in the oven. Everything moved to a rhythm my hands had learned decades ago. No recipes needed, no timers required, just memory. Every now and then, I'd glance out at the driveway out of pure habit. Porch. For years, Nathan always arrived early on Christmas Eve, claiming he was there to help, though he mostly spent the time tasting every dish before dinner. He'd sneak slices of ham while I pretended not to notice, and Richard would wink at me, whispering, "Let him be, one day he's going to miss this." I wondered if today was that day. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Nathan. Porch. Don't forget, tomorrow starts at noon. Patricia has everything set up. Looking forward to seeing you there. I read the message twice. He didn't ask what I was doing, didn't ask if I was okay, and didn't mention a single word about the dinner I'd hosted every Christmas for over 30 years. It was all logistics, as if I were just an ordinary guest. I typed out a few different replies. Porch. I'm already cooking. Derated. Hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. Derated. In the end, I chose the simplest response. Thank you. Merry Christmas, honey. That was all. Sometimes kindness is more about protecting your own heart than anything else. About an hour later, the phone buzzed again. This time it was Olivia. Porch. I let out a small smile, thinking maybe she wanted to smooth things over. Instead, she sent a photo. Patricia was standing in the middle of a massive dining room wearing an elegant emerald dress. Behind her was an impossibly long table set with expensive china, crystal glassware, gold candles, and towering floral arrangements. Porch. The caption read, "Ready for our family's beautiful new Christmas tradition," followed by a smiling heart emoji. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The room was breathtaking, straight out of a magazine cover. Porch. But as far as the eye could see, there wasn't a single toy, not one handmade ornament, no crooked crafts made by the grandkids, no mismatched chairs pulled from different rooms, no flour dusting the counters, and no sign that children had ever laughed in that space. It looked gorgeous, but it didn't look like a place where anyone actually lived. I quietly turned the phone face down on the table. Porch. Richard used to joke that our Christmas dinner was a bit like controlled chaos. Someone was always pulling up an extra chair. At the last minute, a grandkid would inevitably spill juice. The dog would wander under the table, hoping for dropped turkey. And the gravy boat was never where it belonged. Nothing matched, but every single detail meant something. Porch. Around lunchtime, I pulled another tray of cookies from the oven, filling the entire house with their rich aroma. I couldn't help but smile. If scents could store memories, my kitchen held my whole life. As I set the cookies on the cooling rack, another notification popped up. This one caught me off guard. It was from Richard's niece, Susan Miller. Porch. Aunt Winnie, I just wanted to say, I'm already missing your Christmas dinner. A few seconds later, another message arrived. I hope you're doing well. Followed by one more. Everything feels so wrong this year. I stared at the screen. Before I could even reply, another notification appeared from David Carter, Richard's nephew. I really wish we were eating at your house tomorrow. Porch. Then came Emily Brooks. No one can ever replace your cinnamon rolls. One after another, quiet, private messages came through. Not a single one was sent to the family group chat, and none were meant for anyone else to see. I slowly sat down at the kitchen table. They hadn't forgotten. They just hadn't said it out loud before. Porch. I replied to each message the exact same way. Thank you for thinking of me. I hope you and your family have a wonderful Christmas. No guilt, no complaints, and no invitations extended. If people came to my house out of obligation, the tradition was already dead. I wanted them to come only if their hearts led them back. Late that afternoon, I carried several serving dishes into the dining room. Porch. The table was still fully set for 12. Every plate shone under the light, every napkin was neatly folded, and every candle stood quietly waiting. Outside the window, snowflakes began drifting down again, large white flakes dancing slowly across the yard. The whole world seemed quieter than ever before. As night fell, I decided to light the fireplace. Porch. Richard always insisted that Christmas didn't officially start until the first fire was going. He'd sit in his old leather armchair with a mug of hot cider, while every single grandkid would wrestle over who got to sit right next to Grandpa. That chair was still sitting in its usual spot. Sometimes when something funny happened, I'd still catch myself glancing in that direction out of pure habit. Grief doesn't disappear, it just learns better manners. The flames crackled softly as holiday music drifted through the living room. I picked up an old photo album, its pages giving off a faint scent of cedar and passing years. The very first photo showed Nathan at 7 years old, proudly carrying a ridiculously oversized tray of dinner rolls that was nearly bigger than he was. Another pictured Abigail, insisting she wasn't sleepy at all, only to end up fast asleep right under the Christmas tree. Richard was in almost every single picture, laughing, cooking, hugging someone, always making sure no one ever felt left out. A tear slipped down my cheek before I even noticed it. "I miss you," I whispered to the empty room. The house didn't answer, of course, but somehow it didn't feel empty either. It felt patient, as if the walls themselves remembered every single Christmas that had ever filled them with laughter. Around 8 that evening, right as I finished wrapping the last present for Abby, my phone buzzed again. This sender made me freeze. It was Uncle Thomas Reynolds. His message was surprisingly brief. "Merry Christmas Eve, Winnie. Some tables feed people. Some tables feed families. Don't lose heart." I read it 3 times, then smiled. He still didn't know the full story, but somehow his words sounded just like something Richard would have said. I placed my phone next to the framed photograph of my late husband and looked back at the 12 empty chairs around the table. Tomorrow they might still be empty. Or perhaps, sitting here tonight, they felt emptier than they ever would by the time Christmas Day came to an end. For reasons I couldn't quite explain, that thought stayed with me long after I turned off the lights and went upstairs. For the very first time since Nathan made that phone call, I was no longer waiting in sorrow. I was waiting with hope. Christmas morning arrived just as it always did. I woke up before dawn, no alarm needed. After 32 years, my body simply remembered that Christmas was not a day for sleeping in. It was a morning meant to start quietly before anyone else arrived, while the house still belonged entirely to memories. Outside my bedroom window, snow kept falling in slow, graceful flakes. The whole neighborhood was still, save for the distant hum of a snowplow clearing the main road. I slipped on my slippers, threw on a wool cardigan, and headed downstairs. The Christmas tree greeted me first. Its white lights reflected softly off the hardwood floor, illuminating every handmade ornament Richard and I had gathered over our decades together. I stopped in front of the tree just as I always did. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. For years, Richard was always the first to reply, "Merry Christmas, Winnie." Sometimes I still expected to hear his voice. Grief has a strange momentum. It makes your heart feel like a person who passed 15 years ago is still only a room away. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. Within minutes, the familiar aroma filled the house. Next came the cinnamon rolls. I opened the fridge and smiled. The dough had risen perfectly overnight. "Nice work," Richard used to say every time the cinnamon rolls turned out right, even though he had nothing to do with the baking. I chuckled quietly at the memory. "If you were here," I said aloud, "you would have stolen one before breakfast even started." The kitchen slowly woke up around me. Butter melted in the cast-iron skillet, and fresh sage crackled softly in the hot oil. With the turkey sitting on the counter, I began preparing the stuffing. Every movement felt automatic, comforting, and sacred. By 7 o'clock, Frank Sinatra's Christmas album was playing softly through the speakers. Christmas just wouldn't be Christmas without that music. I was stirring the homemade gravy when my phone buzzed on the counter. "Abby," I answered immediately. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." For a second, she didn't say anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was much quieter than usual. "Merry Christmas, Grandma. Are you okay?" I don't know." I stopped stirring. "What happened? They're already arguing." I frowned. Porch. It's only 7 in the morning. I know, she lowered her voice even further. I came downstairs early because I wanted a cinnamon roll. My heart tightened. There weren't any. Of course there weren't. Patricia had undoubtedly hired a catering company to handle breakfast. Abby kept going. Grandma Patricia said, homemade breakfasts make too much of a mess. I closed my eyes. Porch. And then what happened? Dad asked where everyone should put their coats, and Grandma Patricia got upset because Uncle David put his boots by the front door. She said it ruined the aesthetic of the entryway. I stayed silent as Abby let out a sigh. Nobody is really talking. What about your mother? She's trying to keep everyone happy. And your dad? He's pretending everything is fine. Porch. I could picture every single moment. Nathan laughing too much, Olivia trying to smooth over awkward conversations, and Patricia directing everything like the manager of a luxury hotel rather than a host at a family Christmas. I'm sorry, Abby whispered. You have nothing to apologize for. She hesitated. I miss your kitchen. I looked around my kitchen. Porch. A dusting of flour covered one corner of the counter, fresh rolls were cooling under a clean towel, and the rich scent of cinnamon and roasting turkey drifted through every room. I do too, I admitted. She let out a soft laugh. I knew you'd already be cooking. I'm almost done. I can tell. How can you tell? I can hear you stirring something. I smiled. It's the gravy. Porch. Your grandfather's recipe. The classic one. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Sometimes, the quiet between people who love each other is more comforting than words. Then, Abby whispered something that made my heart skip a beat. Grandma. Yes. I don't think this gathering is going to last. What do you mean? Nobody looks comfortable. Porch. Uncle Thomas hasn't smiled once. Aunt Susan keeps asking where your cranberry casserole is, and even Dad looks nervous. Before I could reply, another voice sounded faintly in the background. Abigail. It was Patricia, her voice sharp and controlling. Breakfast is ready. I have to go. I love you. I love you too. The call ended. Porch. I stared at my phone for a moment before setting it back on the counter. Something was wrong, and it went beyond everyone missing my cooking. Food was never the real issue. Families rarely break apart over recipes. They break apart when someone confuses control with love. By 9 o'clock, the turkey was roasting beautifully. Porch. The rich aroma filling the kitchen brought back memories of every single Christmas Richard and I had shared. I carried the serving bowls into the dining room one by one. Mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, candied sweet potatoes, homemade cranberry sauce, fresh rolls, pecan pie, pumpkin pie. Everything looked exactly as it always did. Only one thing was missing, the noise. Porch. In years past, the house would already be overflowing with laughter by now. Kids running around upstairs, adults talking over one another, and Richard telling stories everyone had heard at least 20 times. Now there was only holiday music drifting softly through the room. I walked over to the front window. The street was almost completely deserted, and the snow kept falling. Porch. A pair of cardinals briefly landed on the fence before flying away. Richard always believed that seeing a cardinal on Christmas meant a loved one was near. I smiled at the thought. Maybe he really was. Just past 10, another text arrived, this time from Nathan. Hope all is well. Roads are getting slick. Heading out around 11:30 so you can make it here safely. I read it carefully. Porch. He still expected me to show up, completely unaware that I hadn't packed a single plate into my car. I hadn't decided whether to go yet. A part of me wanted to, not because Patricia deserved the effort, but because Nathan was still my son, because Abby was there, and because most of the time, families need grace far more than fairness. Porch. Yet another part of me wondered what role I'd even play if I showed up. A guest? An observer? A former host? I tossed a dish towel over my shoulder and looked once more at the beautifully set table. 12 seats waited patiently under the glow of Christmas candles, with Richard's chair still resting in its usual spot. For reasons I couldn't explain, I wasn't ready to clear the table just yet. Porch. Not now. A voice deep inside whispered, wait a little longer. It wasn't that I expected a miracle. It was just that hope, no matter how fragile, refused to leave this house. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat quietly by the front window. Outside, Christmas continued to unfold across the neighborhood. Porch. Kids pulled sleds, neighbors waved to one another across snowy driveways, and distant church bells chimed softly. Everything felt so lovely and ordinary. Everything was ordinary, except for a strange growing feeling inside me. It was no longer anxiety or sadness, but a sense of anticipation, as if the day had not yet revealed its true intent. I glanced toward the dining room again. Porch. 12 untouched place settings shimmered under the soft glow of the tree lights. For the first time all morning, they no longer looked lonely. They looked like they were waiting, and somehow, so was I. Maybe I just wanted to stay a few minutes longer in this home that still felt like Christmas. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, nearly a 25-minute drive away, porch. Patricia Dawson's new home looked like something straight out of a luxury magazine, or at least that's what everyone had been saying for weeks. Nathan had proudly described the vaulted ceilings, imported chandeliers, heated stone floors, and a massive dining room that could seat 20 without even adding a leaf to the table. Patricia loved bringing up every detail. She rarely talked about people. She mostly talked about appearances and showmanship. Just after noon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text this time. It was Abby calling. I answered right away. "Hello again, Merry Christmas." She didn't laugh. "Grandma," her voice sounded tense. "Can you talk right now?" "Of course." She lowered her voice. I ran upstairs. "Why?" "So nobody can hear me." I sat up straight. "What happened?" Abby let out a long sigh. "Everything." I waited. Sometimes, if you don't interrupt, people reveal far more. Finally, she spoke. "When everyone first arrived, Grandma Patricia actually had assigned seating." "Assigned seating?" "Yes, with little name cards on the table." I blinked. "Name cards?" "Gold ones." "At a family Christmas dinner?" "Yes." Porch. I tried my best not to laugh out loud. Richard would have found it hilarious. Our family Christmas always involved people swapping chairs halfway through the meal just to chat with someone else, kids sitting wherever they wanted, and adults squeezing closer together whenever an unexpected guest showed up. Nobody had ever needed assigned seating. What else? Porch. She made Aunt Susan switch spots because she wanted all the family photos to look color-balanced. I frowned. What does that mean? She wanted everyone wearing dark clothes seated on the same side. I closed my eyes. Abby had to be mistaken, but deep down I knew she wasn't. Then Uncle David joked that Christmas wasn't a wedding reception, and nobody laughed. What did Patricia say? Porch. She said she spent months planning this event and expected everyone to cooperate. I rubbed my forehead. That sounded entirely like Patricia. Everything meticulously planned, everything perfectly arranged, every detail accounted for, except for people's actual feelings. Abby continued. Then breakfast started. How was it? It came from a catering company. I know. It was cold. Porch. I almost lost my composure right then. Nobody wanted seconds. What about the kids? They asked where the cinnamon rolls were. My heart tightened again. And Grandma Patricia said eating pastries before dinner was too messy. Silence stretched over the line. Finally, Abby whispered, "Everyone looked so disappointed." Porch. I glanced at the tray of fresh cinnamon rolls still sitting on the kitchen counter. The icing set just enough, exactly how Richard liked them. What are your parents doing? Dad keeps saying how wonderful everything is, but Mom is really nervous. Why? Because Grandma Patricia keeps correcting everyone. I could hear faint, indistinct voices in the background over the line. Porch. Then Abby lowered her voice even more. Grandma, yes? I think Uncle Thomas is going to lose his temper. My pulse quickened. Richard's cousin almost never lost his temper. He'd been a high school principal for 40 years and believed staying calm could resolve almost anything. If Uncle Thomas was getting upset, something serious had happened. What did he do? He hasn't done anything yet. Porch. What happened? He asked if anyone wanted to say grace before the meal. That sounds nice. Grandma Patricia said she already invited one of her friends to handle it. A friend? Yes, someone none of us in the family even know. I stared out the window. For 32 years, Richard had said grace every single Christmas. Porch. After he passed, Uncle Thomas quietly took over that responsibility because he knew I couldn't read the prayer without breaking down. Nobody ever asked him to. He just stood up, held everyone's hands, and thanked God for our family. It had become another tradition, and now, even that was being replaced. What did Uncle Thomas say? He smiled, but I know that smile. I knew it, too, all too well. Porch. It was the same smile Richard used whenever he was trying his hardest not to start an argument. Was there anything else? Abby hesitated. I don't know if I should tell you. You don't need to protect me, sweetheart. No, I'm trying to protect my dad. That took me by surprise. What on earth happened? There's a photo. A photo. Grandma Patricia hung a photo above the fireplace. Porch. What kind of photo? A family portrait. I smiled. That sounds nice. No, it isn't nice at all. Why? It was taken back at Thanksgiving, after you went home early because you weren't feeling well. I remembered then, a terrible migraine had forced me to leave early. The photographer showed up after you left. Nobody told you. No. I closed my eyes. Porch. That explained why I'd never seen the photo. Abby continued. It's huge, hanging right above the mantel. Everyone's in it. Dad, Mom, me, Grandma Patricia, Grandpa Harold, even Aunt Susan and Uncle David. She paused. But not me? No. A tightness gripped my throat. I wasn't angry over a photograph, I truly wasn't. What hurt was what it represented. Porch. Someone had decided that the woman who hosted Christmas for this family for over 30 years no longer belonged in the picture. Sometimes, exclusion speaks far louder than an insult. Grandma, I'm so sorry. You didn't do anything wrong. I should have told you sooner. You've told me plenty. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. Porch. Then I heard another voice in the background, firm, calm, and unmistakable. It was Uncle Thomas. Even over the phone, I couldn't catch every word, just bits and pieces. Tradition, respect, that isn't the point. Several people started speaking at once and Abby's breathing grew fast. Oh my gosh. What's happening? They're arguing. About what? Grandma, I have to go. Porch, I'll call you back. The line went dead. I stared at the silent phone in my hand. Across the room, 12 untouched place settings shimmered under the Christmas lights. The food was still warm, the candles remained unlit, and outside, snow kept falling softly on the quiet street. Porch. Meanwhile, over at Patricia's beautiful mansion, her meticulously planned, perfect Christmas was falling apart. Not because of the food, the decorations, or the expensive furniture, but because no amount of elegance could ever replace years of love. I walked slowly into the dining room, resting my fingers lightly on the back of Richard's chair. Porch. Then, for the first time all day, I looked around the table. I was no longer wondering if anyone would come. Instead, I found myself wondering, who was going to be the first to leave Patricia's house? I'd just lit the candles on the dining room table when my phone buzzed again. It wasn't a call this time, but a short text from Abby. He stood up. Porch. Nothing else, no explanation, just those few words. I stared at the screen, knowing full well who she was talking about. Uncle Thomas. My heart began to race. Still clutching my phone, I walked slowly toward the front window. Outside, large snowflakes continued to fall, coating the sidewalk and making the whole neighborhood look like untouched snow. Porch. Everything beyond my front door seemed so serene, yet somewhere in the city that peace had been shattered. 5 minutes passed, then another message popped up. Nobody is talking. I didn't reply. I didn't have anything useful to say, so I just prayed silently, not for anyone to defend me, but that whatever happened would heal my family rather than break it further. The phone rang. Porch. It was Abby again, and I answered before the first ring even finished. Grandma, her breathing was ragged. I'm listening. You won't believe it. What happened? For a moment she couldn't speak. I could hear background noise, not shouting but voices overlapping, along with the sound of chairs scraping across hardwood floors. Then she finally found her voice. Uncle Thomas stood up. Porch. I closed my eyes. What did he say? He looked around the room first. He thanked everyone for coming, and then he said, she paused. I've spent 71 Christmases surrounded by family, and today is the very first time I feel like a guest instead of family. A chill ran right through me. That sounded entirely like Thomas. Never mean, never loud, just stating the honest truth. And then? Porch. Nobody said a word. How did Patricia react? She smiled. I almost let out a laugh. Of course she smiled. Patricia believed a smile could cover up anything. Then she thanked him for coming and said she hoped everyone appreciated how much work she put into hosting this gathering. I waited. What did Uncle Thomas say? Porch. He looked at the dining table, looked at the decorations, looked at everyone, and then... Abby took a deep breath. Her voice trembling slightly. He said, "You prepared a beautiful dinner, Patricia." Another pause. But a beautiful room doesn't automatically become a family tradition. I leaned against the wall. What happened next? Grandma Patricia looked furious. Porch. She asked him what he meant, and he said, "For over 30 years, Christmas was never about a house. It belonged to a woman who welcomed every single one of us without complaint, a woman who never asked for anything in return." Tears filled my eyes. Thomas. Oh, Grandma. Abby's own voice trembled. He was talking about you. Before I could answer, she kept going. Porch. Patricia told him it was time for the younger generation to create new traditions. What did he say? He smiled, the exact smile Grandpa Richard used to have. Then Abby repeated his words carefully. New traditions are wonderful, but replacing love with arrogance is never a tradition. Total silence followed. Even over the phone, I could feel it. The entire room was holding its breath. Porch. What was Nathan doing? He tried to change the subject. Did it work? No. Then what? Uncle David stood up. I blinked. David? Yes, and he said, I miss Winnie's Christmas dinner. Another voice chimed in. Aunt Susan said, me too. Abby's breathing grew fast. Then Grandpa Harold, Patricia's husband, said your turkey stuffing was the best he'd ever had. Porch. I couldn't help a tearful smile. Harold almost never disagreed with his wife. What did Patricia do? She said everyone was being completely disrespectful, but nobody answered. They all just looked at my dad. Nathan, my son. The room had finally become a responsibility he had to face. What did he say? Abby hesitated. I don't think he knew what to say. Porch. That stung almost as much as everything else. Nathan wasn't a bad person. He'd just spent too long trying to make everyone happy, which ultimately proved to be an impossible task. So Uncle Thomas asked him a question. What question? Nathan, if your father were alive today, where do you think he'd be sitting for Christmas dinner? I closed my eyes. I already knew the answer. Porch. Richard would be sitting right here, probably carving the turkey, probably laughing, probably telling everyone to stop arguing and pass the gravy. What did your dad say? He didn't say anything. He couldn't. Why? He was crying. For several seconds, neither Abby nor I spoke. Then she whispered, I've never seen him cry before. I swallowed hard. I hadn't either. What happened after that? Porch. Dad apologized. To whom? To everyone. He said he thought moving Christmas somewhere else would make things easier, and he admitted he never asked what anyone actually wanted. I finally released a breath. Honesty, but it left my heart hanging in suspense. And then, Grandma Patricia lost her temper. What did she do? Porch. She said if people didn't appreciate everything she'd done, they were free to leave at any time. Those words echoed in my mind. Free to leave at any time. Some invitations carry irreversible consequences the second they are spoken. What happened? Abby let out a nervous laugh. You won't believe it. Tell me. Uncle Thomas grabbed his coat. I smiled. Who else? Porch. Uncle David did too, and Aunt Susan. Grandpa Harold stood up. I blinked in surprise. Harold? Yes. He looked at Grandma Patricia and said calmly, I think I'd rather spend Christmas somewhere with laughter. I covered my mouth. Poor Harold. Saying that must have taken immense courage. What did Patricia do? She told everyone they were embarrassing her, but nobody argued back. Porch. They just started putting on their coats. My heart pounded. How many people? I don't know, almost half, maybe more. I instinctively glanced toward my dining room. 12 chairs and 12 place settings were still waiting. Grandma. Abby's voice grew excited. They're asking where you're spending Christmas. They thought you were over here. I almost laughed. No, I'm still home. What? Porch. They don't know. Another pause. Then I heard Uncle Thomas's familiar voice in the background. Abigail, who are you talking to? Abby didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, Grandma. A brief silence followed, then came another voice, strong, warm, and steady. Thomas, put it on speaker, please. A moment later, I heard his voice clearly. Winnie? I'm here, Thomas. Merry Christmas. Porch. Merry Christmas. I only have one question. Go ahead. Did you cook? I looked toward the dining room. Turkey, pies, rolls, mashed potatoes, everything made by my own hands. I did. How many people did you make enough for? Tears spilled over as I smiled. 12. He let out a deep laugh, the exact kind Richard used to imitate. Wonderful. Why? Porch. I heard the sound of car doors shutting in the background, and then Thomas answered, We're coming home. The line went dead. I stood frozen in place, unable to move for a long moment, just standing in the middle of my kitchen staring at the silent phone in my hand. Then, through the heavy snow outside the window, I caught the faint rumble of a car engine. Porch. One, then another, and then another, coming closer and closer, heading toward my house, toward my table, toward home. For the first few seconds after the call ended, I just stood there in the kitchen, unable to move a muscle. Thomas's final words echoed through the quiet house. We're coming home. I looked toward the dining room, as if truly seeing it for the first time all day. Porch. 12 candles flickered softly, and faint wisps of steam still rose from the covered serving dishes. The Christmas tree cast a gentle reflection against the window glass, its colorful lights dancing alongside the falling snow outside. I softly spoke Richard's name. I think they're coming home. My voice broke before I could finish the sentence. Porch. I quickly wiped my eyes with the corner of my apron. There was no time to cry now. If guests were really on their way, I had work to do. I moved busily around the kitchen, lifting lids off dishes to make sure everything was still hot. The turkey sat perfectly on its large platter, the mashed potatoes just needed a quick stir, and the gravy was still piping hot. Porch. I slipped another basket of dinner rolls into the oven for a few minutes so they'd be soft and warm when brought to the table. The familiar rhythm of preparing for guests came back so naturally that my body took over before my brain could even process it. For the first time in days, I wasn't cooking for memories anymore. I was cooking for real people. Then, I heard it. Porch. The sound of a car door shutting, followed by another and then another. I froze, walking slowly toward the front window. 3 vehicles pulled onto my snow-covered street. First Uncle Thomas's old blue SUV, followed closely by David's pickup truck, and then Susan's silver sedan. My heart beat so hard I could hear it pounding in my ears. Porch. More headlights appeared around the corner, another car, and then another. I covered my mouth with both hands. Oh, Richard. The first person to leap out of the SUV wasn't Thomas, it was Abby. Before the vehicle even came to a complete stop, she jumped into the snow, sprinting across my front lawn with total disregard for the cold. Porch. I barely unlocked the front door before she threw herself into my arms. Merry Christmas, Grandma, she cried. I broke down too. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. I missed you. I missed you too. She held me even tighter. It didn't feel like Christmas over at that house at all. I smiled through my tears. It does here. Porch. Yes, she took a deep, dramatic breath. Cinnamon rolls, turkey, and Grandpa. Those last few words almost undid me completely. Before we could say another word, Uncle Thomas walked up the front steps holding a pecan pie. Behind him came Susan carrying 2 casseroles, David with 3 grocery bags, and Emily Brooks holding a large salad bowl. Porch. Even Harold Dawson, Patricia's own husband, stepped out of another car carrying a slow cooker. I stood there, completely speechlessly overwhelmed. Thomas offered a gentle smile. Permission to enter? I immediately stepped aside. You never need permission. He looked around my living room, glanced at the tree, and then looked toward the dining room. Finally, a smile broke across his face. Porch. Now this, he took a deep breath. Finally smells like Christmas. Laughter erupted, filling every single corner of the house. Until that exact moment, I hadn't realized how desperately I'd been longing to hear that sound. Porch. Coats piled high on the entryway bench. Winter boots lined the hallway, and melted snow dripped onto the welcome mat as someone accidentally knocked over the umbrella stand. It was absolutely wonderful. Within minutes, my quiet house returned to its wonderfully noisy self, looking just like it had every Christmas for the past 30 years. Porch. Susan walked straight into the kitchen without even asking, "Where do you need me?" I blinked. "You just got here." "So?" She smiled. "Christmas always starts in the kitchen." David was already pulling open drawers looking for serving spoons, while Harold quietly set his slow cooker on the counter. "I brought sweet corn." I stared at him. "You really didn't have to." He gave a sheepish smile. "Porch. I wasn't sure if you'd made it." "I did. I hoped you did. Old habits, I guess." I laughed out loud. "You can never have too much corn. Ain't that the truth?" Thomas pulled off his coat and took a look around. "I've been waiting all morning to sit down in this house," he said, shaking his head softly. "I just really wish things hadn't turned out the way they did." "No," I replied. "Porch. Things turned out exactly the way they were supposed to." Before I could say anything else, there was another knock at the door. More family, more coats, more laughter. Slowly but surely, the dining room began to fill up. Those 12 empty seats didn't stay empty for long. They were claimed, one right after another. Porch. Abby instantly snagged the seat right next to mine, just like she'd done ever since she was a little girl. "I'm not giving this spot up to anybody." "I wouldn't expect you to." I smiled, arranging the dishes on the buffet line. David popped the cork on a bottle of sparkling apple cider. Someone turned the Christmas music up a bit louder. Porch. For the first time all day, the kids who had come with their cousins were upstairs, laughing and chasing each other around. The house had come back to life. And right then, the front door opened again. The noise in the entire room died down instantly. Nathan was standing in the doorway. His shoulders were dusted with fresh snow. His eyes were red, and he looked completely worn out. Porch. Standing right behind him was Olivia. Neither of them said a word. For a long, agonizing few seconds, nobody moved. Finally, Nathan took a step inside. His voice was terribly raspy. I didn't know where else to go. I could feel every single eye in the room shift toward me. They were waiting, watching, hoping. Porch. I walked across the living room until I was standing just a few feet away from him. Nathan looked just like the little boy who used to sneak cinnamon rolls before breakfast, only older, tired, and deeply ashamed. "I'm so sorry, Mom." His shoulders began to tremble. I really thought. He got choked up and couldn't finish the sentence. Porch. I gently reached out and adjusted the collar of his winter coat. It was a habit left over from his childhood. "You look frozen solid." He stared at me blankly. "I broke your heart." "Yes, you did. I don't deserve." I cut him off softly. "Have you eaten?" He blinked. "What? Have you had any lunch?" He looked completely lost. "No." I nodded toward the dining room. Porch. "Then you got here just in time." Tears started streaming down his face uncontrollably. "I don't understand." I offered him a gentle smile. "A long, long time ago, your father and I made a rule for Christmas." He frowned. "What rule?" "Anyone who walks through that front door never leaves on an empty stomach." The room was still dead quiet. Then Thomas cleared his throat softly. Porch. "Well, I think dinner's going to get cold." Everyone burst out laughing. The heavy tension in the air evaporated in an instant. Nathan covered his face for a brief second, then pulled me into a hug, squeezing tighter than he had in years. "I'm so sorry. I know. I should have called you earlier. I know. I should have listened to you. I know." He stepped back. Porch. "I don't know how to make up for any of this." I looked over at the dining room. Except for 2 spots, every single chair was taken now. The candles threw off a warm, cozy glow. Upstairs, you could hear the kids laughing. The rich aroma of roast turkey filled every corner of the house. You've already started. How? You came home. Porch. Nathan looked around slowly, taking in every familiar decoration, every old ornament, every crooked paper snowflake, every single memory. Then he whispered, "It never stopped being home, did it?" I smiled. "No, it was just waiting for you." Within minutes, my dining room sounded just like it had for decades. Someone was laughing entirely too loud in the kitchen. Porch. The kids came thundering down the stairs after finding a box of old board games in the upstairs closet. David was arguing with Harold over whether the Detroit Lions were actually going to pull off a championship run this season. Susan was convinced someone had hidden the cranberry casserole from her on purpose. Porch. And Thomas claimed he was merely testing the mashed potatoes for quality assurance, even though everyone knew he'd already scooped up 3 giant helpings. For the first time this Christmas, I stopped noticing who wasn't there. Instead, I took in every single person who was. Nathan stood quietly at the entrance to the dining room, watching the space burst with life. Porch. His eyes followed every conversation, every burst of laughter, every old tradition. It was as if he was stepping back into a memory he had once forgotten, a memory that belonged to him. I brought the turkey into the dining room, and the space went quiet in an instant. It wasn't because anyone was waiting on the food, but because everyone remembered what was supposed to happen next. Porch. Richard's carving knife. Without even thinking, I pulled open the drawer next to the china cabinet and brought it out. The polished wooden handle had been worn smooth after decades of use. I rested my thumb along the side. For so many years, this had been Richard's absolute favorite moment. Porch. He would stand right where I was standing now, clear his throat with dramatic flair, and announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for the finest turkey in all of Franklin County." Every year, someone would play along with a dramatic sigh. Every year, the grandkids would clap wildly. And every year, he would take a bow as if he were accepting an Academy Award. The memory made me smile. Porch. Thomas noticed it. "I was thinking about that exact same thing," he said quietly. I held the carving knife out to him. He raised an eyebrow. "Winnie, I think Richard would want you to do the honors." He looked down at the blade, then slowly took it from my hands. "It would be my honor." Everyone naturally gathered around the table. Porch. There were no assigned seats, no place cards, no carefully orchestrated seating chart. People just sat wherever they felt like sitting, exactly as they always had. Abby immediately slid into her favorite spot right next to me. David sat across from Thomas. Susan squeezed in right between Emily and Harold. Nathan was still standing there. He looked uncertain, maybe a little uncomfortable. Porch. Finally, I pulled out the chair next to me that had stayed empty all day. "Sit down, sweetheart." He hesitated. "I don't know if I should." I gave him a gentle smile. "This is where you've always sat." He slowly took his seat. Nobody objected. Nobody gave him a cold look. It was as if that chair had been saved for him all along. Thomas raised his hands. Porch. Without a word or a plan, everyone instinctively reached across the table and joined hands with the person next to them. Old hands, young hands, big hands, small hands. Just like they had every single Christmas before. Thomas bowed his head. "I've said this blessing before dinner many times." His deep voice echoed through the room. Porch. "But I don't think I've ever known what it meant as clearly as I do today." He paused for a second. "Lord, thank you for reminding us that houses are built of wood and nails, but families are built on grace. Thank you for warm food, forgiving hearts, and second chances." Porch. "And thank you." He glanced over at me. "For the people who keep loving us quietly, even when we forget how much it costs them." A few people quietly wiped away tears. Beside me, Nathan's shoulders trembled slightly. "Amen." Thomas finished. "Amen." Everyone echoed in unison. What happened next made me laugh out loud. Porch. Before anyone could even make a move, David reached straight for the dinner rolls. Susan slapped his hand away instantly. "At least wait until the turkey hits the table." David grinned. I've been waiting all morning for these. The room erupted into laughter, and the lingering tension melted away completely. Conversations started popping up from every corner. The kids demanded extra gravy. Orch. Someone accidentally knocked over a glass of sparkling cider. Harold bumped into the salt shaker. Emily couldn't remember which bowl the serving spoon belonged to. Everything was wonderfully, delightfully imperfect. Exactly the way Christmas was meant to be. Halfway through dinner, Abby leaned over toward me. Grandma. Yes? I have something I want to say to everyone. I smiled. Orch. Go right ahead. She stood up, surprising everyone. The room gradually quieted down. I know nobody asked me to give a speech. Thomas chuckled. The floor is yours. She took a deep breath. Every single Christmas I can remember has been spent around this table. She looked around the room. I used to think Christmas was all about the presents. Orch. When I was little, I thought Christmas existed because Grandma made cinnamon rolls. A few people chuckled softly. But this year, she swallowed hard. I realized it exists because this house makes everyone feel like they belong here. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. She turned her eyes toward Nathan. Dad, I love you. I know you didn't mean to hurt Grandma. Orch. Nathan lowered his eyes. I know. But next time, she offered a soft smile. Just remember that traditions aren't old because they're outdated or useless. They're old because someone spent years building them with enough love to make them last. Nobody said a word. Nathan reached across the table and took Abby's hand. I'm sorry. I know, I forgot. She squeezed his fingers. Orch. Words so simple, coming from a 16-year-old girl, yet somehow carrying more wisdom than anything any adult had said all day. Dinner went on. The turkey disappeared much faster than usual. The kids tracked down the cookie tin. Thomas and David got into a debate over whether Richard had deliberately burnt the first batch of dinner rolls all those years ago. Orch. He definitely did it on purpose, David insisted. Thomas laughed. No, he just couldn't tell a story and watch the oven at the same time. I still say he did it on purpose. Harold spoke up unexpectedly. I think Richard just liked giving everyone something to joke about so he could keep them entertained. Laughter broke out around the table again. I quietly took in the scene around me. Orch. The conversation was no longer about what had gone on over at Patricia's house. Nobody seemed interested in criticizing her. Instead, everyone was talking about Richard, sharing old holiday trips, funny childhood memories, and embarrassing family moments. The kind of conversation that only happens when people feel entirely safe. At one point, Susan looked around the table and laughed. Orch. You know what the funny thing is? What's that? David asked. I don't think a single person has looked at their phone for over an hour. Everyone instinctively patted their pockets. She was right. Phones had been left behind in coat pockets and purses. Nobody cared about taking photos. Nobody cared about social media. Nobody was worried about whether the table looked picture perfect. Orch. The memories themselves were more than enough. Nathan leaned in close to me. Mom. I noticed something. What's that? Not a single chair in this room matches. I smiled. I know. I never noticed it before. You and Dad always refused to replace them. Why? Dad used to say every single chair reminded him of someone. Nathan looked around the room. Orch. This chair came from Richard's parents. That one was picked up at an old yard sale. One of them's been repaired 3 times. Another belonged to my grandmother. Every one of them is different. Everyone has a story. They don't match. No, but somehow when you put them all together, they fit just right. I smiled and said, Ain't that the truth? Nathan stared thoughtfully at the table. Orch. I guess that's what family is all about. I looked toward the end of the table at Richard's empty chair. For a brief second, I could almost picture him smiling. Not because everything was perfect, but because everyone had finally remembered what actually mattered most. I really thought moving Christmas just once wasn't a big deal. It wasn't just once. Nathan looked a little confused. Porch. We were leaning side by side against the porch railing. Christmas wasn't the first tradition to get replaced, I said, looking at him. Do you remember Easter? He nodded. Patricia hosted it. And then Thanksgiving. You said her dining room was bigger. He lowered his gaze. And then the 4th of July. And then it was Abby's birthday. And then Mother's Day brunch. Porch. His shoulders sank slowly. I kept telling myself that each individual decision didn't really matter. It didn't. He looked up. What? No single holiday matters on its own. What mattered was that every time you picked conveniences over our history, you were asking me to step aside piece by piece, without even realizing it. He buried his face in one hand. I never saw it that way. Porch. I know. I should have seen it. Yes, you should have. For a while, we just listened to the quiet neighborhood. In the distance, someone laughed. A dog barked. Church bells chimed faintly through the cold afternoon air. Finally, Nathan spoke up again. Do you know why I never argued with Patricia? I looked at him. No. Why? Because she always made me feel guilty. He gave a sad laugh. Porch. If I didn't agree with her, she'd remind me how much she had done for Olivia. If I tried to defend you, she'd claim I was taking sides. If I tried to find a middle ground, she'd accuse me of being ungrateful. He shook his head. I was just so tired, so I took the path of least resistance. The easiest road usually belongs to the loudest voice in the room. I nodded slowly. I suppose so. Porch. He stared out at the snow-covered yard. Do you know what Uncle Thomas said to me after everyone left? No, what? He waited until nobody else was around. What did he say? Nathan gave a bitter smile. He told me that your father wasn't respected because he dodged tough conversations. He was respected because people always knew where he drew the line. I smiled. Porch. That sounds just like something Thomas would say. Nathan looked down. I spent so many years trying not to disappoint anyone, and today I managed to disappoint everyone anyway. Especially you. I reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm. You're not the first person to lose your way. He swallowed hard. But I almost lost my family. You came very close. He nodded. Porch. I deserve that answer. I won't lie to you. I know. He hesitated for a second, then asked the question that mattered most. Can you ever trust me again? I didn't answer right away. Trust isn't fixed with a couple of nice speeches. It has to be rebuilt, one choice at a time. I believe trust can grow. It can grow back, too. But only if someone keeps taking the time to nurture it. Porch. He offered a tearful smile. I can do that. I hope so. No, I promise I will. We stood there in silence for a moment, then he spoke up again. There's one more thing. What's that? Before I came over here, I stopped by Patricia's house. I raised an eyebrow. You went back? I had to tell her where I was going. He let out a deep sigh. Porch. She told me that if I walked out that door, I was choosing between you and her. What did you say? He smiled. For the first time in my life, I told her I wasn't choosing between two mothers. I was choosing the place where my family has always belonged. A heavy lump formed in my throat. What did she say to that? She said I'd regret putting her through that embarrassment. Porch. And do you regret it? He looked through the dining room window. Inside, people were sipping coffee, eating pie, and sharing endless laughs. The kids were running around holding unwrapped board games. Thomas was pretending he hadn't just swiped a spoonful of whipped cream from the dessert table. Porch. Susan was giving David a hard time because he was already reaching for a second slice of pie before anyone else had even finished their first. Harold looked happier than I had seen him in years. Nathan smiled softly. No. The only thing I regret is not coming over sooner. Right then, the back door opened and Abby walked out holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. There you guys are. Porch. She handed one mug to me and the other to her dad. I figured serious talks are a lot easier when marshmallows are involved. Nathan smiled. You sound just like your grandmother. I learned from the best. She wrapped one arm around mine and the other around Nathan's. The 3 of us stood side by side, looking out over the snow-dusted backyard. Porch. It had been a very long time since we had stood together like that. No explanations needed, no defenses. We just stood there together. 3 generations, one family, starting fresh. By early evening, The house had settled into that cozy rhythm that only happens after a wonderful meal. The little kids were stretched out all over the living room floor, working on a 500-piece Christmas puzzle. Abby and two of her cousins were teaching the younger ones a card game that Richard had made up years ago. Over in the family room, Thomas and David had picked up their annual football debate right where they left off, while Susan insisted they were both dead wrong, since neither of them actually knew the rules as well as they claimed. Their laughter drifted from one room to the next. It felt like real Christmas. The fireplace crackled softly, filling the house with a comforting warmth that seemed to reach far beyond the room itself. I was rinsing out coffee mugs in the kitchen when I felt someone standing behind me. I turned around. It was Olivia. She looked completely exhausted. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and a few strands of hair had fallen loose from the neat, elegant style she had put up that morning. For the first time since she married Nathan, she didn't look so picture-perfect anymore. She looked real, like an ordinary person with real emotions. "Can we talk?" I dried my hands on a towel. "Of course." She glanced over at the family room. "Somewhere a bit more private?" I nodded toward the small sunroom at the back of the house. Richard had built it with his own hands nearly 20 years ago, because I had always wanted a quiet spot to read while watching the snow fall. It had become our quiet place. We walked in and closed the glass door behind us. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Outside, the backyard glistened under the fresh snow. Inside, a single-floor lamp cast a soft, warm light. Olivia stared out the window. "I owe you an apology." I stayed silent. She had been carrying those feelings around all day, and she deserved the chance to say them out loud. When Nathan told me everyone was coming over here, I wasn't surprised. She gave a soft laugh. If anything, I felt relieved. That answer surprises me. "Relieved?" She nodded. "I just didn't want to admit it." She folded her hands together. "My mother has always been a very dominant person." I smiled gently. "That's a very polite way to put it." Olivia couldn't help but laugh a little too. "I know." But the smile faded quickly. "When I was growing up, my mother decided everything. What we wore, what events we went to, who we visited, what counted as success. If I ever disagreed, she'd tell me I was being ungrateful." She looked down at her wedding ring. "I grew up believing that loving someone meant keeping the peace and never causing trouble." Those words sounded painfully familiar. Just an hour ago, Nathan had said almost the exact same thing. When I married Nathan, I thought things would change. But they didn't. My mother just ended up with more people to manage. She shook her head. I kept telling myself she meant well. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she genuinely wanted to help. But somewhere along the line, helping turned into controlling. I nodded slowly. "I noticed." She gave a sad smile. "I know you did." "But you never got into an argument with her." "No, I didn't. I wondered why." I looked out the window. "Because arguing wasn't the kind of lesson I wanted Abby to remember." Olivia's eyes welled up with tears immediately. "I never thanked you for that. There's nothing to thank me for." "Yes, there is." She sat down in the chair across from me. "Do you remember Abby's 8th birthday?" I smiled. "The princess cake." She nodded. "My mother insisted on holding the party at her country club. I remember. You quietly suggested moving everything over there." "I thought it was the easiest way to keep the peace." Olivia shook her head. "I didn't find out until later." "Find out what?" "You had already bought all the decorations, made all the food, booked the magician." "But you didn't complain once. You just canceled everything." I gave a faint smile. Kids don't remember where a party was held. They only remember how it made them feel. She looked straight at me. "No, they remember who made them feel loved." Silence settled between us. Then, she murmured something I hadn't expected at all. "I feel so ashamed." I reached across the small table and gently covered her hand with mine. "Feeling ashamed only matters if it helps you change." She nodded. "It did change me. I've been watching all day." Watching what?" "The difference between your home and my mother's." I waited as she continued. My mother wants everyone to come over and admire the Christmas she put together. George. But you just want everyone to enjoy their own Christmas. Her words touched me deeply. She wasn't taking my side. She was simply seeing things clearly at last. I spent so many years trying to keep both of you happy, she gave a sad smile. But I never realized that one of you wanted admiration, while the other just wanted family. George. She looked toward the living room, where another burst of laughter rang out. Do you know what completely changed my mind today? What's that? When Nathan walked into this house, she paused. I've never seen my husband relax so quickly. I smiled. He grew up here. I know, but it was more than that. He stopped putting on a show. What do you mean? George. He stopped trying to keep everyone comfortable. He was just being himself. The truth behind her observation settled quietly between us. Nathan hadn't laughed naturally like that in months. Today he laughed just like the boy Richard and I had raised. Olivia wiped away another tear. I let him down too. No, both of you just lost your way. There's a difference. She looked unsure. Is there? George. Yes. People who fail give up trying, but people who lose their way can still find their path back home. She offered a soft smile. Do you really believe that? If I didn't, I wouldn't have opened my front door today. Another long silence followed. Finally, she reached into her bag. I brought something with me. She pulled out a small envelope. I almost threw it away. What is it? George. She handed it to me. Inside was a printed copy of the family photo that hung above Patricia's fireplace. In the picture, everyone was smiling beneath elegant holiday decorations. Everyone was there, except me. Olivia looked uncomfortable. I asked the photographer to print an extra copy. Why? I thought, maybe one day I'd have the courage to apologize to you. George. I looked closely at the photograph. It didn't hurt me anymore. It just felt incomplete. Then, I turned it over quietly. The back was completely blank. I picked up a pen from the small writing desk nearby. What are you doing? I smiled and said, completing it. I carefully wrote on the back. A family isn't complete because everyone shows up in the same picture. George. A family is complete because everyone knows they belong. I handed it back to her. Olivia stared at the written lines. Then, tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. I'm going to frame this. You don't have to do that. I want Abby to read it one day. I squeezed her hand again. Then, make sure you tell her the rest of the story, too. What rest? Tell her that people make mistakes. George. Tell her that pride pulls families apart, but humility brings them back together. She nodded. I will. Right then, the sunroom door opened a crack. Nathan poked his head in. I've been looking all over for you two, he offered an uncertain smile. Am I interrupting? Olivia stood up and quietly slid her hand into his. No, we were just wrapping up. He looked back and forth between us. George, is everything okay? For the first time in a long while, Olivia gave a genuine, tearful smile. I think things are going to be just fine. Nathan wrapped an arm around her shoulder. The three of us walked back into the living room together. As we crossed the doorway, Abby looked up from her card game and smiled at us. George. For a brief moment, it felt as though another invisible weight had quietly lifted off our family. Not because every wound was fully healed, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. Sometimes, the longest journey home begins with a single honest conversation. Christmas morning turned into Christmas night almost before anyone realized it. George. The kids finally put their board games away, only because someone announced there was still enough pie left over for a second round of dessert. David declared that eating 2 helpings of dessert on Christmas didn't count against your health at all, putting it in his own words. When the big guy is celebrating a birthday, calories don't count. Susan rolled her eyes. George, you've been using that excuse for 20 years, and it's worked every single time. Everyone burst out laughing. The warmth in the house settled into something much deeper than a simple celebration. It felt like peace. George. Not the fragile kind of peace built on everyone agreeing on everything, but a solid kind of peace. The kind that only arrives after difficult truths have finally been laid out in the open. As the night grew darker, families started gathering up their coats and wrapping scarves around excited children. Porch. The younger cousins hugged each other goodbye, making promises for New Year's dinners and Sunday lunches. One by one, cars pulled out of the driveway. Before long, only a few of us were left. Thomas, Harold, Nathan, Olivia, Abby, and me. The living room bore all the signs of a day well spent. Empty coffee mugs rested on side tables. Bits of wrapping paper peeked out from under the sofa. Porch. A forgotten child's mitten lay by the fireplace. Richard would have smiled seeing all of this. He always believed that if a house looked spotless right after Christmas, something must have gone terribly wrong. Nathan offered to wash the remaining dishes. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him roll up his sleeves without even being asked. Porch. When he was a teenager, I used to tease him because every time he washed dishes, he somehow managed to splash water across half the kitchen. Apparently, adulthood hadn't fixed his technique. Within minutes, the counter was covered in water. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. He turned his head. "What's funny? You still wash dishes the exact same way you did when you were 16. Porch. He gave an embarrassed smile. "I guess some things never change." "No, and some things shouldn't." Olivia quietly wiped each plate dry before placing it back in the cabinet. Neither of them argued, neither of them rushed. For the first time in years, they were working together naturally. Watching them reminded me of Richard. Marriage isn't built on grand romantic gestures. Porch. It's built right in the kitchen, over piles of dirty dishes, through shared responsibilities, and in quiet moments of forgiveness. When the last serving bowl was put away, Harold cleared his throat. "I think it's time for me to head home, too." Nathan looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Harold gave a warm smile. "I think your mother-in-law and I both need some time to think." Porch. Nobody brought up Patricia. Finding joy in someone else's loss isn't something to celebrate. Whatever was going on in her home, those were lessons she had to work through on her own. As Harold put on his coat, he turned to me. "Winifred, yes? I owe you an apology, too." "You don't owe me a thing." "Yes, I do." He adjusted his scarf slowly. "Porch, I spent so many years watching Patricia compete with you. I should have stepped in and put a stop to it." I shook my head gently. "You're only responsible for your own choices, not hers." Even so, he gave a sad smile. I confused keeping the peace with staying silent. I couldn't help but notice how similar his words sounded to Nathan's. Porch. Maybe the whole family was working through the exact same lesson. "I won't make that mistake again." I nodded. "I believe you." He held out his hands. As I took them, he gave a gentle squeeze. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding all of us what Christmas is really supposed to be." After he left, the house grew even quieter. Just the four of us remained. Porch. Nathan came into the living room holding a cardboard box. "I found this up in the attic earlier." I raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "I think Dad hid it away." That grabbed my attention immediately. When he was alive, Richard's favorite thing to do was hide items away for future Christmases. Inside the box were dozens of old VHS tapes, photo albums, and a few small envelopes. Porch. On the front of one envelope, written in Richard's unmistakable handwriting, was my name. My hands trembled slightly. I've never seen this before. Nobody else had, either. The envelope must have slipped behind another storage bin years ago. I carefully opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I recognized Richard's handwriting right away. "My dearest Winnie." Porch. If you're reading this, it probably means I finally got organized enough to label my hiding spots. Everyone chuckled softly. "Or," he continued, "it means I've made my way home to heaven and you're cleaning house without me." I smiled through my tears. That sounded so much like him. I kept reading out loud. "There is one thing I hope you never forget. Porch. Someday our children will grow up and become adults. They will make decisions we won't understand. Sometimes they will do wonderful things. Other times, they will make mistakes. Either way, love them. Not because the mistakes don't matter, but because someone once loved us through ours, too." The room was completely still. I looked up for a brief second, then kept reading. Porch. If Christmas ever gets complicated, don't fight over the dinner table. Don't compare houses. Don't keep track of invitation lists. Just make sure you never lock your front door. People who know they are truly loved will always find their way back home. My voice broke. I couldn't go on for a few seconds. Nathan covered his face. Olivia quietly wiped away her tears. Even Abby was crying silently. Porch. Richard had written those words nearly 20 years ago. Long before any of this happened. Long before Patricia came into the picture. Long before today's hurt took place. Yet somehow, it felt as if he knew exactly what we would need to hear today. I carefully folded the letter back up. Nathan looked at me and asked, "Can I read that sometime?" "Of course you can," I replied. Porch. I hope Abby's kids get to read it one day too. Abby laughed through her tears. I don't even have kids yet. You will one day. And this is how they'll get to know their great-grandfather. She looked a little confused, but they'll never get to meet him. I gently stroked the letter. Oh, honey, yes they will. Porch. Every single time we live out the lessons he left us, he's still right here teaching this family. The room went quiet again. Outside the window, snow started falling once more, soft, gentle, and peaceful. Nathan walked over to the front window. I've been thinking, what about next year? I smiled. What about next year? He turned back to look at all of us. Porch. I don't want Christmas to happen just because everyone expects it to. I want it to happen because everyone chose it. Thomas would have loved hearing that, and so would Richard. I took a look around the room. The tree was still glowing bright. The stockings were still hanging from the mantel. The sweet scent of cinnamon still drifted in from the kitchen. Everything felt just right. Porch. Not because the day had gone completely according to plan, but because love had quietly found its way back home. And this time I knew it was here to stay. Christmas came and went, but the conversations it started didn't stop there. In a lot of families, once the holiday decorations come down, all the arguments get swept right under the rug. Porch. Everyone pretends like nothing ever happened, only for those same old wounds to get ripped wide open again the very next year. I had zero interest in living like that anymore. As it turned out, nobody else did either. The first week of January brought a massive snowstorm to Columbus. My front porch was buried under nearly 8 inches of fresh snow. Porch. Every morning, I'd stand at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the neighbors shovel their driveways and watching family after family pack away their Christmas lights. I packed away Richard's ornaments one by one, wrapping each piece in the same old newspaper we'd been using for years. Some people find packing up Christmas depressing, but I never felt that way. Porch. Richard always believed Christmas shouldn't just live on a calendar. It belonged in the way people treated each other long after the holidays were over. 3 days after New Year's, right after lunch, my doorbell rang. It was Nathan. He was standing on the porch holding a snow shovel. You didn't answer your phone. I smiled. I was upstairs. Figured as much, he said, holding up the shovel. Porch. So, I just started clearing your driveway. You really didn't have to do that. I know, he smiled, but I wanted to. That simple sentence meant the world to me. Not because of the driveway, but because he was no longer doing things out of obligation. He was choosing to do them. In less than an hour, my front walkway was cleared off completely. Porch. Before he left, he quietly replaced a broken porch light I'd been meaning to fix for months. Again, without anyone asking him to. By the following Saturday, he was back, this time carrying a toolbox. I noticed your backyard gate wasn't shutting right. It still works, barely. You really did come way too early, I teased. Nathan grinned. You told us to. I stepped aside. Porch. Well, get on in here before those cinnamon rolls decide they don't need your help after all. Within minutes, the kitchen was wonderfully crowded. Flour dust covered half the counter. Nathan somehow managed to spill sugar all over the floor. Abby insisted on measuring out every ingredient herself, and Olivia was laughing louder than I had heard in years. I watched them from across the room. Porch. Richard would have loved every single second of this. At one point, Nathan looked around the room. Feels like something's missing. What's that? Christmas music. I smiled. I've been waiting for you to turn it on. He walked straight over to the old stereo, not needing to ask where it was or how it worked. He pulled out Frank Sinatra's Christmas album, the exact same record Richard played every single holiday morning. As the music started playing, Nathan softly whispered, "Good morning, Dad." Nobody answered, yet somehow the room didn't feel quiet at all. By 10 in the morning, relatives began arriving one after another. Cars parked along both sides of the street as usual, kids ran around playing in the snow in the front yard, and neighbors waved from across the road. Mrs. Jenkins knocked on the door, bringing over a loaf of her homemade cranberry bread. "I brought my traditional contribution?" She smiled. I laughed out loud. "You're always right on time." Uncle Thomas walked in holding the exact same pecan pie as last year. Changing up a proven recipe is a dangerous game. David walked in and announced he was even hungrier than he was last Christmas because he had strategically skipped breakfast. Susan called him out on his lie immediately. Harold followed right behind them, bringing over another dish of sweet corn, making everyone laugh. Then something completely unexpected happened. Around noon, the doorbell rang again. Nathan went to open the door. Standing on the porch was Patricia. She had come all by herself, wearing no fancy designer coat or expensive jewelry, just a simple navy blue winter coat, carefully holding a small bakery box in her hands. The entire house fell silent. She looked unsure, maybe even a little afraid. Without saying a word, Nathan looked over at me. I walked toward the doorway. For a few long seconds, neither of us said anything. Finally, Patricia lowered her head. "I know I wasn't invited." "No, if you'd rather I leave, I completely understand." I kept quiet. She slowly held out the small bakery box. I tried making cinnamon rolls. A subtle smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Tried making them? They turned out awful. That unexpected bit of honesty almost made me laugh out loud. She continued, "I've spent this entire year thinking things over, and I realized something." "What's that?" "I only ever learned how to host an event." She looked past me into the house, where bursts of laughter were drifting out from the dining room. "But I never learned how to make people feel welcome." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm still learning." I looked at the bakery box, then back at her, and finally over at Richard's photo frame across the living room. His letter came floating back into my mind. "Never lock your front door. Come on in." Patricia stared at me. "Really? It's freezing out there. Come inside." There was no sudden round of applause, no dramatic speeches. Thomas simply walked over, took the bakery box from her hands, and smiled. "We just so happened to have room left for one more dessert." Everyone laughed, and the lingering tension evaporated in an instant. Patricia looked around the house at the kids running down the hallway, the family helping out in the kitchen. No assigned seats, no picture-perfect decorations, just pure joy. She whispered softly, "I finally get it." Later that afternoon, as everyone gathered around the dining table, Abby stood up holding her notebook. "I have a new tradition." Everyone turned to look at her. She smiled. "Every year before dinner, I want one person to share a story about why this family means so much." She looked straight at me. "Grandma?" I hadn't prepared a thing, but maybe for the moments that truly matter, nobody ever is. I slowly stood up and looked around the table. Every single chair was taken, every face was familiar, and every heart, I hoped, was a little softer than it had been last year. "I used to think I was protecting Christmas," I began softly, "but I was wrong. I was really just protecting a house." I took another look around the room, and I almost lost both. I offered a gentle smile. "Here's what I finally learned. Houses get old, recipes change, kids grow up into adults, tables get scratched, and chairs stop matching. But as long as people keep choosing each other, year after year, home will always find them." A quiet peace settled over the room. Not an awkward silence, but a profound quiet that told you everyone understood. Nathan reached across the table and took my hand. Abby took my other hand. One by one, every single person around that table joined hands, exactly as Richard had always hoped they would. Outside, the snow kept falling softly beneath the night sky. Inside, 33 years of Christmas tradition lived on. Not because one woman refused to let them die, but because an entire family had finally realized why they were worth saving in the first place. As I looked over at Richard's empty chair, I smiled. Not because I missed him any less, but because I finally knew that love had kept its promise. It had found its way back home.